Billionaire Fiancée laughed at the injured maid. Then the doctor recognized the scar that saved his family. "You're bleeding on my $5,000 dress," she laughed, stepping back like the maid's blood might stain her more than it already had. Nobody in that hospital room knew this moment would destroy everything she'd built. Nobody knew the doctor walking in with the test results was about to freeze mid-sentence, staring at a scar on the maid's shoulder he hadn't seen in 11 years. A scar that once saved his daughter's life. What happens when the woman you mocked turns out to be the reason your family still breathes? Stay until the end. You will not see this coming. Welcome back, friends, to another emotional story made just for you. Tonight's story is about pride, cruelty, hidden kindness, and a secret that changes 4 lives forever. It's a story about how the people we overlook are sometimes the ones who saved us without ever asking for thanks. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from? Let's begin. Maid falls. Fiancé laughs. A billionaire watches in silence. Rosa Delgado had worked for the Whitmore family for 6 years. And in that time she had learned exactly how invisible a person could become while still standing in a room full of people. She was 43 years old, with tired eyes and hands that had scrubbed 1,000 floors in the Whitmore mansion outside Charleston, South Carolina. She had a daughter, Maya, 16 years old, who dreamed of becoming a nurse. Rosa worked double shifts to save for that dream, folding towels at midnight, ironing shirts at dawn, smiling through exhaustion because smiling was easier than explaining how tired she really was. The Whitmore mansion sat on 11 acres of manicured lawns, with a fountain out front that cost more than Rosa's entire apartment building. Daniel Whitmore, 38, was the heir to Whitmore Shipping, a logistics empire his grandfather built from a single tugboat. Daniel was kind in the way rich men are kind when they've never had to be anything else. Generous with money, careless with attention. He barely noticed Rosa most days. He barely noticed anyone who wasn't Victoria. Victoria Sinclair was Daniel's fiancée. Blonde, sharp-featured, always dressed like she was walking into a photograph. She had not always been this way. People who knew her in college remembered a quieter girl, a girl who once organized a fundraiser for a children's hospital and cried when they hit their goal. But that girl had been slowly buried under 6 years of country clubs, charity galas that were really just competitions, and a circle of friends who measured love in carrots. "Darling, the caterer needs an answer on the shrimp tower," Victoria said one evening, scrolling through her phone while Rosa dusted the bookshelves nearby. "Rosa, tell him yes. Tell him yes to everything. I don't have time for small decisions." Rosa nodded and said nothing. She had learned that silence was safer than opinions. That Thursday, the mansion was in chaos. The engagement party was 3 days away, 400 guests, a band flown in from New York, flowers imported from Ecuador. Rosa had been asked to carry a crystal chandelier centerpiece down the marble staircase because the event planner's assistant had called in sick. "Be careful with that," Victoria snapped without looking up. "It's worth more than you make in a year." Rosa gripped the box tighter, her arms already aching from 4 hours of setup. Halfway down the staircase, her foot caught the edge of a runner rug that hadn't been secured properly. She felt her ankle twist, felt gravity take her, and in that split second she made a choice. She threw the box away from her body and let herself fall instead. The crystal centerpiece shattered against the marble. Rosa hit the stairs hard, her shoulder slamming into the banister, her head grazing the corner of a step. Blood began seeping from a cut above her eyebrow. For one terrible moment, the entire staircase went silent. Then Victoria's voice cut through the air, not with concern but with fury. "Are you kidding me? That centerpiece was custom. Daniel, do you know what that cost?" Daniel rushed forward, but even he hesitated between the shattered crystal and Rosa's bleeding forehead, as if his mind couldn't decide which mattered more. "She's bleeding," he finally said, kneeling beside Rosa. "Someone call 911. She's fine, she's dramatic, Victoria said, waving a dismissive hand. But then she looked down and saw the blood dripping onto the sleeve of her cream silk blouse. Her face twisted in disgust. "You're bleeding on my dress," she said, and then, unbelievably, she laughed. A short, sharp, humiliated laugh, the kind people make when they're more embarrassed than angry. Rosa lay there, dizzy, humiliated, tears mixing with blood on her face, and she thought of Maya. She thought, I need to survive this so my daughter still has a mother who can work. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. Daniel insisted on riding along, ignoring Victoria's protests that they had a dinner reservation. As the paramedics lifted Rosa onto the gurney, her sleeve rode up, revealing an old, jagged scar running from her shoulder to her collarbone. Pale, silvery, clearly years old, clearly the result of something violent. Nobody in that room thought anything of it. Nobody except the man who would walk into her hospital room 3 hours later, holding her chart, about to feel his entire world tilt sideways. A little girl once bled in an alley. A stranger saved her. Tonight that stranger has a name. Dr. Michael Ellison had been an emergency physician at Charleston Mercy Hospital for 14 years. He had seen thousands of patients, patched thousands of wounds, and trained himself long ago not to let faces linger in his memory. It was safer that way, easier to sleep at night. But there was one face he had never forgotten, even though he'd never actually seen it clearly. 11 years ago, his daughter Sophie had been 7 years old, walking home from a birthday party 2 blocks from their house, when a car ran a red light and struck her on the crosswalk. Michael had been at the hospital that night, not as a doctor, but as a father, screaming for someone to help his little girl who lay bleeding on the pavement while cars slowed down and drove past. A woman had appeared out of nowhere. She wasn't a nurse, wasn't a doctor, just a stranger walking home from a cleaning job. She had knelt beside Sophie, torn a strip from her own shirt, and pressed it hard against the wound on Sophie's leg where an artery had been nicked. She had stayed calm, spoken softly to a terrified 7-year-old, and kept pressure on that wound for the 11 minutes it took the ambulance to arrive. 11 minutes that the trauma surgeon later said made the difference between Sophie living and Sophie bleeding out on the street. In the chaos of the ambulance ride, the ER intake, the surgery, the woman had disappeared. Michael had asked everyone, paramedics, bystanders, hospital security, but nobody had caught her name. All he remembered was a jagged piece of glass from the shattered windshield that had cut deep into her own shoulder as she knelt beside his daughter. Glass she never once complained about while she saved Sophie's life. He remembered the scar because he'd glimpsed it as she pulled her sleeve back to work. A distinct shape, almost like a lightning bolt, running from shoulder to collarbone. For 11 years, Michael had wondered who she was. He had donated to shelters, spoken at hospital fundraisers, always hoping somehow the story would reach her, that she would know how much that moment had mattered. Sophie, now 18, was healthy, was about to start college, was alive, because a stranger had refused to walk past. That Thursday evening, Michael was reviewing an incoming trauma case. Female, 43, laceration to the forehead, possible concussion, fall from staircase. Routine. He'd handled 1,000 cases like it. He walked into exam room 4 with her chart in hand, ready to deliver test results to the family waiting outside. "Mrs. Delgado, I have your CT scan results, and the good news is..." He stopped. Rosa was sitting up in the hospital bed, a bandage over her eyebrow. Her hospital gown slipped slightly off one shoulder. And there it was, the scar. The lightning bolt scar he had thought about every single day for 11 years. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he lowered the chart. "Your shoulder," he said quietly. "How did you get that scar?" Rosa blinked, surprised by the question. "A car accident. A long time ago. I was helping a little girl who got hit by a car. Glass cut me while I was holding pressure on her leg." She said it simply, without drama, the way people describe things they never expected credit for. Daniel, standing near the window, frowned in confusion. Victoria, seated in the corner scrolling through wedding vendor emails, didn't even look up. Michael's voice cracked. What was her name? The little girl. Rosa's brow furrowed. I never knew. I just stayed until the ambulance came. I prayed for her for years. I always wondered if she made it. Michael set the chart down on the counter because his hands were shaking too much to hold it. Her name, he said, was Sophie. Sophie Ellison. She's my daughter. The room went completely silent. She's turning 18 next month, Michael continued. His eyes filling with tears he made no effort to hide. She's alive because of you. I have looked for you for 11 years. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Tears entirely different from the humiliated ones she'd cried on the staircase hours earlier. She's alive, Rosa whispered. She made it. Daniel stepped forward slowly, staring at the woman who had cleaned his floors for 6 years, who he had never once asked a real question about her life. Rosa, he said quietly, you never told me any of this. You never asked, Rosa said. Not with bitterness, just truth. And in the corner of the room, Victoria finally looked up from her phone, her face pale, beginning to understand, though not yet fully, that the woman she had laughed at 3 hours ago was about to change everything. The centerpiece wasn't the only thing that shattered that day. Michael Ellison could not stop staring at Rosa. 14 years as a physician had taught him to control his emotions in front of patients, but this was different. This wasn't a patient. This was the woman he had thought about every single night for over a decade, the ghost who had saved his daughter and vanished before he could even say thank you. I need to call Sophie, he said, his voice thick. I need her to hear this from me in person, but I need to call her right now. He stepped into the hallway, and through the glass window of the exam room, Daniel and Victoria watched him dial with trembling fingers. Inside the room, the silence was heavy. Daniel pulled a chair close to Rosa's bed and sat down, something he had never once done in 6 years of employing her. Rosa, he said again, softer this time. I owe you an apology, not just for today. For 6 years of not seeing you. Rosa shook her head slowly. You don't owe me anything, Mr. Whitmore. I do my job because it feeds my daughter. That's enough for me. It's not enough, Daniel said. Not after what I just heard. Victoria stood up abruptly, smoothing her dress. Her face arranged into something that resembled concern but didn't quite reach her eyes. Well, this is certainly a lot to take in, she said. Rosa, I'm sorry about earlier. I was just stressed about the party. It was technically an apology, but it landed like a pebble thrown into a canyon. Small, hollow, swallowed by the size of what had just happened. Daniel glanced at her, and something shifted in his expression. It was subtle, the kind of look that comes from a man noticing, for the first time in years, the gap between who his fiancée used to be and who she had become. He remembered faintly a Victoria from college who once spent an entire weekend building homes with Habitat for Humanity because everyone deserves a safe place to sleep. Where had that woman gone? Michael returned to the room, his phone still in his hand, tears streaming freely down his face now. She's coming, he said. Sophie is coming right now. She's 20 minutes away. She wants to meet you. She's wanted to meet you for 11 years. Rosa began crying again, overwhelmed, her hand pressed against her heart. There's something else, Michael said, and this was the moment nobody in that room was prepared for. Rosa, when I couldn't find you after the accident, I made a promise to myself. I told the hospital administration that if I ever found the woman who saved Sophie, I would personally guarantee anything she or her family ever needed. Medical care, education, anything within my power. I run the hospital's Community Health Foundation now. I sit on the board that awards full-ride nursing scholarships to underprivileged students in this county. Rosa's breath caught. You said your daughter wants to be a nurse, Michael continued, glancing at the intake form on his clipboard, which listed Rosa's emergency contact as Maya Delgado, age 16. I would like to personally sponsor her education. Fully. Whatever it takes. Rosa broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. 11 years of quiet sacrifice suddenly meeting 11 years of quiet gratitude in one hospital room. Victoria, watching this unfold, felt something cold settle in her stomach. This wasn't about a broken centerpiece anymore. This wasn't even about her humiliating behavior on the staircase. This was about a fundamental question that was now hanging in the air of that room, unspoken but deafening. What kind of person had she become, and what kind of person had Rosa always been? I need some air, Victoria said suddenly, and walked out of the room. Daniel didn't follow her. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he stayed exactly where he was, sitting beside a woman he had overlooked for 6 years, watching her receive the kind of gratitude that money could never manufacture. 20 minutes later the door opened, and a young woman rushed in. Tall, dark-haired, 18 years old, tears already streaming down her face before she even reached the bed. Sophie Ellison had waited 11 years for this moment. It's you, Sophie whispered, staring at Rosa's shoulder, at the scar she'd only heard about secondhand from her father 100 times over the years. You're really real. Rosa opened her arms and Sophie collapsed into them, and the two of them cried together. The survivor and the stranger who saved her, finally, after 11 years in the same room. What would you do if you were in Daniel's place, watching the woman you were about to marry reveal exactly who she'd become, while the woman you'd ignored revealed exactly who she'd always been? Some apologies come too late. Some come exactly on time. Victoria stood in the hospital parking lot, arms wrapped around herself despite the warm South Carolina evening, staring at nothing in particular. Her phone buzzed with messages from the event planner about the engagement party, about flower arrangements, about a 400 guest list that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else's life. She thought about the girl she used to be. The one who'd cried real tears over a fundraiser goal. The one who'd spent a college spring break building homes in rural Georgia, coming back with blistered hands and a heart full of purpose. When had that girl disappeared? Was it the first country club luncheon where she'd learned to speak in a certain tone about the help? Was it the friend group that measured worth in real estate and last names? Was it simply easier, softer, safer to become someone who didn't feel too much? She thought about Rosa's face on the staircase. Not angry, not even surprised by Victoria's cruelty, just resigned like she'd expected nothing less. That look haunted her more than anything else that day. Inside, Daniel sat beside Rosa's bed while Sophie held Rosa's hand, the three of them talking quietly about the years in between. Sophie's recovery, her physical therapy, the moment she first walked again, the birthday parties Rosa never got to see but had prayed for anyway. I want to do something, Daniel said finally, once the emotional wave had settled slightly. Rosa, I know money can't undo 6 years of not seeing you as a person. But I want to try to be someone who does better. Starting now. You don't need to do anything, Mr. Whitmore, Rosa said, wiping her eyes. Please call me Daniel. And I do need to. Not because I feel guilty, although I do, but because it's the right thing to do, and I've spent too many years not doing the right thing simply because I could afford not to. He pulled out his phone and made a call to his family's foundation director. Within 10 minutes, arrangements were underway to cover Rosa's medical bills in full, to fund Maya's entire nursing education alongside Michael Ellison's scholarship program, and to give Rosa a raise that would allow her, for the first time in 6 years, to work one job instead of 2. Rosa protested weakly, but the exhaustion of gratitude eventually silenced her objections. Meanwhile, Victoria walked back into the hospital, her heels echoing against the tile floor, and stopped at the door of exam room 4. She watched through the glass for a long moment, Daniel laughing softly at something Sophie said, Rosa smiling despite the bandage on her forehead, a family of strangers becoming something warmer than family in the space of a single evening. She had never once looked at Daniel that way. She had never once been in a room and felt what was happening in that room right now. She pushed the door open. Everyone looked up. "Rosa," Victoria said, her voice unsteady in a way none of them had ever heard before. "I need to say something, and I need you to actually hear it, not just accept it because it's polite." The room went quiet. "I laughed at you while you were bleeding," Victoria said, her voice cracking. "I laughed at you because I was more upset about a dress and a centerpiece than I was about a human being in pain. And the terrible thing is, that wasn't even unusual for me anymore. That's who I've been for years. I don't even know when it happened. I don't know when I decided that people like you mattered less than people like me." Rosa said nothing, watching her carefully. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Victoria continued. "I don't think I deserve that yet. But I wanted you to know that I heard everything today. I heard what you did for Sophie. I heard what Daniel said about 6 years of not seeing you. And I realized I've been someone who doesn't see people either. I don't want to be her anymore." Tears slid down Victoria's face, and for the first time in years, they weren't tears of frustration or embarrassment. They were tears of genuine, uncomfortable, necessary shame. Rosa studied her for a long moment. "I forgive you," she said finally. "Not because you deserve it yet, like you said, but because holding on to anger has never once fed my daughter or paid my rent. I let it go because I need the room in my heart for better things." Victoria nodded, unable to speak, and quietly left the room again. Not in anger this time, but to be alone with the weight of who she had become and the question of who she might still choose to be. The twist wasn't that Rosa had a secret past. The twist was that the people around her had been given a mirror, and only some of them were brave enough to look into it. 6 months can change a person more than 6 years ever did. 6 months later, Charleston Mercy Hospital held its annual Community Health Foundation Gala. The same kind of event Victoria used to attend purely to be seen, dressed in gowns that cost more than most families' monthly rent, air-kissing people she privately despised. This year was different. Maya Delgado stood on the small stage in the hospital's main atrium, wearing scrubs for the first time as part of her new nursing pre-program, accepting a scholarship certificate from Dr. Michael Ellison himself. Sophie Ellison, now a freshman at the College of Charleston studying to become a physical therapist, stood beside her, having become close friends with Maya over the past 6 months. The daughter of the girl who was saved, and the daughter of the woman who saved her, now building their own friendship independent of the past that connected them. Rosa sat in the front row, wearing a simple blue dress, no longer working 2 jobs, no longer folding towels at midnight. She still worked at the Whitmore estate, but differently now. As head of household staff with a fair salary, respect, and Daniel's insistence that she take actual vacation days, something she'd never done in 6 years. Daniel sat beside her, not as her employer in that moment, but as someone who had become, in his own words, a better man because a better woman showed him what he'd been missing. He and Victoria had postponed their engagement indefinitely after that night in the hospital, not out of anger, but out of Victoria's own request. She had told him, through tears, that she needed to figure out who she was before she could promise to be someone's wife. And in a folding chair near the back of the room, dressed simply without diamonds, without the armor of designer labels she used to hide behind, sat Victoria Sinclair. She had spent the past 6 months doing something nobody who knew her 6 months ago would have predicted. She had quietly begun volunteering at a women's shelter in North Charleston, 3 days a week, at first just organizing donations, then eventually sitting with women who had nowhere else to turn, listening to stories that made her old life of galas and centerpieces feel impossibly small. She hadn't told anyone at first. She wasn't doing it for credit or forgiveness. She was doing it because somewhere in the 6 months since that hospital room, she had remembered who she used to be before the world taught her that kindness was a weakness the wealthy couldn't afford. When the ceremony ended, Rosa found Victoria near the refreshment table, standing slightly apart from the crowd the way she used to stand in the center of it. "I heard about the shelter," Rosa said. Victoria's cheeks flushed. "It's not much. I just wanted to do something real." "It's not nothing," Rosa said gently. Growth never announces itself with fireworks. It just shows up quietly and keeps showing up. Victoria's eyes filled with tears again, though these ones came easier now, more familiar. Thank you for forgiving me that night. I don't think I would have started any of this if you hadn't. You started it, Rosa corrected her. I just gave you room to remember who you already were underneath everything else. Across the room, Daniel watched the two women talking, something like hope flickering across his face for the first time in months. He had not stopped loving Victoria when their engagement paused. He had simply started loving the version of her that was slowly returning, patient enough to let her find her own way back rather than demanding it happen on his timeline. Michael Ellison stepped up to the small podium one final time before the evening closed. 11 years ago, he said, his voice carrying across the atrium, a stranger knelt beside my daughter on a sidewalk and refused to walk away. She never asked for a reward. She never expected recognition. She simply did what was right because it was right, and that single choice rippled forward into every life in this room tonight. He looked directly at Rosa. Tonight, this hospital is proud to announce the Rosa Delgado Community Nursing Scholarship, funded permanently by the Whitmore Family Foundation, to ensure that every year students like Maya, students who might otherwise never afford this dream, get the chance she almost didn't get. The room erupted into applause. Rosa stood, overwhelmed. Her hand pressed to her chest exactly the way it had been 6 months earlier in that hospital bed, except this time the tears falling down her face were tears of pure, uncomplicated joy. Some scars tell a story of pain. Others tell a story of who you really are. A year passed. Maya Delgado, now in her second year of nursing school, worked part-time at Charleston Mercy Hospital as a patient care assistant, learning under nurses who remembered her mother's story every time they saw her in the hallways. She had inherited Rosa's steady hands and her quiet, unshakable kindness, the kind that shows up not for applause but simply because someone needs help. Sophie Ellison had switched her major, inspired by everything she witnessed that year, from physical therapy to nursing as well. She and Maya were now planning to specialize in trauma care together, an inside joke between them that felt more like destiny than coincidence. Rosa still worked at the Whitmore estate, though these days it felt less like employment and more like family. Daniel had built her a small cottage on the edge of the property. Not out of charity, he insisted, but because she deserved a home of her own after everything, and because Maya needed a quiet place to study. And Victoria had changed in ways that went far beyond volunteering. She had stepped back from the social circles that once defined her entirely, quietly cutting ties with friends who mocked her new priorities as beneath her. She had returned to school part-time, pursuing a degree in social work, something that would have seemed impossible to the version of herself that once measured her worth in shrimp towers and imported flowers. Daniel proposed again in the spring, this time in the backyard of the shelter where Victoria volunteered, surrounded not by 400 society guests but by 12 women and their children who had come to see Victoria as family. She said yes through tears, and this time, everyone in the room understood that the ring on her finger meant something entirely different than it would have a year before. At the wedding that following autumn, held on the lawn of the Whitmore estate under string lights instead of imported chandeliers, Rosa Delgado stood not as staff, but as an honored guest, seated in the front row beside Michael and Sophie Ellison. Maya served as one of the ushers, proudly wearing a small nursing pin on her dress that Rosa had given her the day she finished her first year of school. During the reception, Victoria found a quiet moment to pull Rosa aside. "I want you to know something," Victoria said. "You didn't just save Sophie's life 11 years ago. You saved mine too, in a different way. You gave me a mirror when I needed one most, and instead of using it to destroy me, you used it to help me see clearly." Rosa smiled, the same warm, tired, resilient smile she'd carried through 6 years of double shifts and a lifetime of being underestimated. "That's what scars are for," she said, touching the faded lightning bolt mark on her shoulder. "They remind us what we survived and sometimes what we saved along the way." That evening, as the sun set over the Whitmore estate and laughter echoed across the lawn, nobody in that garden was the same person they had been the day Rosa fell on that staircase. Victoria had rediscovered her humanity. Daniel had learned to truly see the people around him. Sophie and Maya had built a friendship rooted in gratitude instead of privilege. And Rosa, quiet, humble Rosa, had finally received, after a lifetime of giving without expectation, a community that gave back. The lesson of their story was simple, though it took every one of them a lifetime to fully understand it. Kindness is never wasted, even when it goes unnoticed for years. The people we overlook are often the ones holding up the world around us, quietly, without asking for credit. And it is never too late to become, once again, the person you were always meant to be. If this story touched your heart tonight, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one, and leave a comment telling us which moment moved you the most. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always finds its way back home. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.